Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining, especially Lou, our guest speaker today. My name is Roman Beylin. I'm the founder of DueDilio. We're a marketplace that basically helps business buyers and sellers put together their M&A deal team. Um, and I'm also a member of the BizNexus advisor panel focusing on M&A due diligence. Each month, I'm going to be hosting one of these AMAs with a member of the DueDilio network. And today, super excited to have Lou Paruthikal. I'm sorry if I butcher the last name.
No, you got it right on.
But Lou is director of M&A technology and acquisition integration at LCG Advisors. And we're going to be tackling the topic of the first 100 days post business acquisition. I'm really excited about this one. It's really something I don't see discussed often enough. I think this is great. So from here, I'm going to hand it over to Lou just for a quick intro, and then we'll dive into some questions that I have, but also some questions that were sent to me by members of the BizNexus community. So Lou, hand it over to you for a bit.
Very nice. Thank you, Robin. Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here. So, as you said in the intros, I'm with LCG Advisors. I'm in our M&A practice, and we focus basically on deal services. Today, I think we focus on the 100-day plan post integration, but we do everything from QV to due diligence and so on. So we do the full service on any sort of deal transactions, and based in Tampa, Florida. So
Awesome.
go forward.
Yeah, fellow Floridian here. That's great. So I guess let's dive right in. So in M&A, I know like with everything, preparation is really key. So even before the close of the transaction, how can business buyers really prepare for the first 100 days post acquisition? What should they be doing? What should they be focusing on?
Right, that's a great question. So I can tell you that there's a pattern that always forms. So 100 days after the closing is basically pure execution. So if you look at if you want to make it simplified, there's strategy. When do you do strategy? And I'm going to answer that in a second. Then there's execution. And if you have the first piece done, then the plan and execution goes so much better. So that's one aspect. And then I want to talk about the workload aspect of it. The place where you want to do the strategy, and what I mean by strategy is what do we do about communications? What do we do about tactical exercise, margin protection, cash flow protection, and cash flow growth, business case for the acquisition, all of these things. And I'm summarizing, but this is all like functions in HR, functions in customer service, sales, marketing, go-to-market strategy, all of this kind of stuff. We know that there's our targets, our indication of interest, and then we get into LOI and due diligence. But there's a space in there that if you can make it, that it doesn't have to be formal, it's a preliminary due diligence. It could just be even in a 1-hour conversation on some key questions. And that's your first opportunity to get an idea of how to formulate strategy. When you start formulating these strategies, you get a playbook in play and all this kind of stuff. And the playbook is great. It contributes to intellectual capital, but intellectual capital on its own, it's not going to bring you across the finish line. But it does give you a little bit of a springboard in some tasks and some things you don't have to memorize. That's the first place you have it. But in some cases, how the deal is structured, you may not get that opportunity. So the second place you get that is preliminary information from wherever you have. Your business. Usually the company you acquire is either an add-on or tuck-in or new line of business, some sort of go-to-market strategy. You can also get it during the formal due diligence, just right after LOI, but before close. And what you want to do there is capture all the strategy, what we're going to do to support the business case after close. Now, there's a little bit of an effort there, and I'm going to pause in a second. I just want people to know that, coming together with the strategy, is a nice piece of work. If you can get to do it before LOI, it's somewhere between after indication of interest, fantastic. If you can't, you have to do it in that DD space along with your other activities. Once you have that ready to go, staffed and all that, then once close is done, you do it. If you have a bad feeling that the LOI is not going to go, you shouldn't do this effort because it'll be
Right.
energy out the window. But anyway, I give you a long answer, but that's the thing. Strategy, execution. Ideally, you do it right after indication of interest, if not before LOI. And then once you have that strategy, it's pure execution. Roman, you got to give me an opening at some point because I want to talk about the workload. That's usually where people.
For sure. Oh yeah, yeah. I have. There's definitely some questions here, and yes, we'll talk about all of that. So it sounds to me, try to at least think about the strategy portion as soon as you know that this is a green light acquisition, that there's a high chance that you're going to be closing. Sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. And what you said, the high chance, you do the probabilities. Otherwise, you'd be spending a lot more energy, much more concentrated energy when you get into closer right after close.
Yeah, right. And I assume that there's probably several parts even thinking about the strategy. First, you kind of maybe have a general outline, and then once you're maybe past the due diligence phase, that's when you kind of perfect it, crystallize everything.
Exactly. A key component in that strategy is going to be communications. And then if you already have some kind of a baseline on how you run your business, and then you know what it takes to bring that business online, those impacts or whatever the right word is that show you the differences, you can start addressing that right away.
Okay. Interesting. And I'm sure when you're thinking about kind of assembling your team, like the post-integration team, because I'm sure you have, a team that's kind of does the due diligence, maybe a team you're working on, deal sourcing. Now, when you're thinking about post-integration, with everything, having the right team is crucial. So, who should be part of that, and what are kind of the key roles?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, it's subjective depending on the eyes you go through. But if you want to measure what are the key roles, the number one, maybe it's the only one, is if you have the authority to make decisions. If you're a decision maker, that's the key role. Well, and why is that important? Because when the company that's coming in, there's variables like culture, there's expectations around cash flow, KPIs, all of this kind of stuff. You need somebody that can make decisions quickly, that can align and go forward. I want to tell you on that decision making, a person that's already capable or entitled to make these decisions, they all typically have a business to run, whether you're at the executive or lower. So they also have that. What I didn't want to dismiss is when we talk about key roles is best practice is to have an integration management office, usually a third party that's a partner that's done this, trusted, that can work with the organization. That, in contrast to, I have an organization that's business as usual. I have another organization on the buy side I'm integrating. There's like a nice group of people. If you add that workload onto the existing workload, which I have seen, and it's historically, it's a really bad record, that's a pitfall. So you have to be sensitive on that. So key roles, decision makers, be sensitive on having an integration management office in this case to work with the organization, do some interim services, and then transition it to business as usual. That's a proven successful formula. The other way is you take a little bit of risk, see how it goes, but it's the track record is not very good.
Okay, so it sounds like there are kind of there's an internal team, and then there's an external team too that you can bring in.
Correct.
Does that, based on your experience, does that differ based on deal size? So I 100% understand, large transactions, right? $500 billion deals, internal team, external team. $5 million transaction, $10 million transaction. Do you still see that? I guess it's that composition of the team.
Yeah, that framework it does. So it doesn't really matter about the size, but there is a variable.
Okay.
What that be, the smaller organization, you may not need a large staff to handle all the change management and formal KPIs and so on. The larger you get in the organization, you'll need more people in the integration management office because there's a lot more sophistication. What does that mean?
Right.
If you're in Fortune 100, you have a lot of documentation to produce, scorecards, KPIs, and so on. And then if you're in a much smaller organization, you still go through the same thing. As you're acquiring a company with people and same kind of emotions and everything, but your teams are typically much smaller. Same principles, smaller team with regards to the number of people. If you're having an acquisition of several thousand, 50,000 plus, you'll need quite a large team to get it done successfully. I can give you an example. In my history, a few years ago, in 2014, the organization I was with acquired an $11 billion global organization, and it took 18 months to do the full integration, maintaining all of the business case, and with a team of somewhere between 300 and 400 people, something like this, a global one, versus a much smaller organization, say only domestic and in the $5 million space. You don't need a team as near as large, but you go through the same principles. It's communication, culture, expectations around cash flow, KPIs, and baseline, and that sort of thing. That's how the size works, but the principles are the same.
Okay. Yeah. So I definitely have some questions about those KPIs, but maybe can you walk us through kind of a typical timeline for the first 100 days?
Right. So the first 100 days, my experience is, right, that's a kind of like a bucket that says, 3 to 4 months after you've done the acquisition, you want to get to a business as usual phase. So the transaction is done. You have your strategy set. Part of the strategy is the communications. As soon as the close is done, the best practices, again, depending on the size, you want to do a communication, a joint communication, both CEOs or COOs, if it's a very large organization, town halls. First 10 days, you want to do the communication out. You want to do a written communication through all emails. You want to do a town hall. If it's like this, if you can't be somewhere in person, website, press releases, all different forms of communication, first 10 days, if you will. The second 20 days, there's a lot of deliverables, but we're having a good conversation. The second 20 days is to set expectations and start focusing on where we need to go on cash flow, what's product line, whether it's new customers, so on and so forth. Then after that, it's to realize the synergies or all of the benefits of having this acquisition done. Just start measuring that. These are operational kind of KPIs, turnovers, floor stock, whatever the business measures the KPIs on, and then you go forward from there. So I just gave you like 10, 20, and 30, but you can do this 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. Within 3 months, get to a place where your business as usual and start looking at transferring all the interim services to business as usual. This can take up to a year, maybe more or less.
Okay, and so it sounds like first communication is that's the first step. Make sure everyone knows what's going on. You're transparent. You're clear. Then you make sure you hold on to your clients. they don't leave, and then kind of integrate the processes.
No, that's exactly it. Maybe a simpler way of looking at it is you do the communications because you want to relieve all anxiety. You want to also communicate with your customers. Usually there's a new remit to address on invoices, just to give you some kind of example, but they need to know, and this is all in your strategy, you're doing what they need to do going forward. Our salespeople should make contact with the key customers and address all of this. So you want to address any sort of potential anxiety, which you've already predicted or planned in the earlier stages. You're just doing execution. Same thing with vendors or suppliers. Make sure everybody's in line. And I would say customers are very important, but most importantly, the employees need to have all their anxieties removed and understand where they fit in the big picture, and things will work out well. Philosophically and principally, these are the kind of things you want to address in the first 100 days.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I know you touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about kind of some of those key KPIs that you really should be monitoring during those first, couple of months.
Right. So KPIs have different levels of importance. Now, let me tell you, the accountants will always argue a little bit on this, but you can say that the revenue components are more important. So what are some of the key KPIs you always want to monitor throughout? It's your AR, accounts receivable, your invoices, your cash collections. all the components that reflect cash flow, you want to be on top of that right away. And any discrepancies, any problems, that's number one. So it's loosely put sales and AR. Those are key KPIs. All the other ones are important, but I would say those are secondary. As long as we can accommodate the inbound to plan and all this, the cash flow coming in, we're good. Second one I would have to say is, again, it's on the fulfillment side, is that is the turnover. The moment we get an order, the moment we ship it out, if you're in the manufacturing distribution space, is that KPI protected, getting better? If it's deteriorating, that's an indication right away we need to apply some effort in that space. The amount of money you have on the floor, your inventory, that's important on the balance sheet. You don't want that to increase, in a surprising way. If it's a managed way and this is going to go something like this, you go. But basically, the understanding is some of the key KPIs are everything on the revenue side, anything on retention or customer retention, new products, throughput, whether it's in the distribution, whether it's in customer service. You want to measure the throughput KPIs. People call it different things. And then you go to the other ones. For example, you don't want to have suppliers waiting too long for the payment terms and this kind of thing. But you also measure all of that going forward. So these are all operational KPIs and financial KPIs. Predominantly in subledger with AR and AP, you want to look at those first because they're the most important, and you look at the rest. I mean, There's a lot of detail I can get into. Fine.
Yeah.
People understand, right? These are cash flow. Cash is king. So you monitor those ones right away, and you get on top of that. And then if you do that, you should be kind of okay for KPIs.
So anything that affects cash flow, so revenue. I'm sure there's probably something around employee turnover. Important.
There is. That's in the HR space. You want to. So yes, you want to look at that. But I can tell you this: there is a correlation, a direct correlation, between how you communicate with employees, the workload of employees. If those two things are managed and under control, the turnover is not so much. I've also seen in my experience where some of the stuff is underestimated, and we'll call it morale or this no job satisfaction, and then the turnover does go high. Root cause analysis always amounts to the same thing. Communication's been poor, strategy's been poor, and people have been left feeling that they're not part of the organization, and you start looking around. At all levels, by the way, all levels.
Yeah, people want certainty. Yeah,
they want to know where they fit long term and short term, but they need to know something. So that's on that KPI, on the turnover. This is typically the root cause. It's also the hardest to understand because in the beginning you have to talk about what's our change management strategy. And to some people, this is very easy. To others, it's not so easy. But that's the way things are. That's where I come in. I have to educate people on how these things are valuable.
Yeah. So so because communication is so important, do you have any? Can you maybe provide some tips for managing communication with I guess employees, customers, and I guess also vendors, right? That's the other piece of it. Any quick best practices that you can share?
Yeah, I would say this. So internal communications to our employees and to other companies within the portfolio, you need to have a web page out. I'm being very tactical. You need to have a web page out there dedicated to that communication. You need to have internal. When I say you need to, these are best practices. You have internal town halls with the executives, and then followed by the HR people. The audience is composed of different levels and different types of people from different organizations. They have to be addressed with the messages that resonate. Surveys are always good before and after, but this is always historical kind of information. So you asked me a question. What's the best tips on that? So I'll go to external in a minute. Internally, you need to have a web page, a communication at least for the first 2 months, maybe a communication every 2 weeks, vis-a-vis a letter or some kind of publication. And I encourage once a week town hall to get everybody on either one cycle or 2 cycles where executives from the combined organization can address the audience from the different topics and do a Q&A. So that's on the internal piece. On the external piece, for customers, well in advance, As soon as the lawyers give the green light that the purchase agreement has been settled and we're closing, you have all of these messages prepared. Hey, this is the new organization. This is what we will be doing. These are our key contacts. This is what you can expect to do as a result of the change, and just keep the right people informed on the customer side. I would say top 10, top 20, whatever the right number is, customer visits are highly recommended. If not compulsory, you have to do that. So you have that face-to-face, and it shows how important and any questions they might have. With the suppliers will typically want to know how this impacts them, whether they're going to be continuing the relationship, whether it's a growth opportunity, or sometimes they get trimmed back a little bit. Right strategy for the suppliers on how it impacts them. So let me summarize there. So on the external parts for suppliers and customers and everybody in either of the spaces, communication is key, and the communication should be focused on how does it impact them. Do they have to change any of their procedures to work with our business? And then they can adjust with the right lead time. And internally, the employees, we just have to keep them together culturally and everything like this, the team building, picnics, whatever, small things like that. It makes a big difference. So that's these are tips, but do those basic things and you will see it'll pay dividends quickly.
Yeah. And let's see, let me just go through a couple of these questions.
So the pitfalls, you were telling me, like we were talking earlier about pitfalls.
Yes. Yeah. So besides communication, maybe what are some of the challenges, pitfalls you've seen where things didn't go as planned?
Yeah. Where it falls down is there's a term in the industry. It's called crisis management. When it gets too far gone, and there's a worry that the acquisition is going to cause problems versus being part of the team for success. I've seen this in a variety of cases, and we usually come in with the kind of work that I do to fix these kind of things. And the number one is the pitfall is underestimating the work that's involved with bringing in an organization. I'll take sales, for example. The leaders in sales, our sales staff, they are busy as business as usual. If you can imagine saying, hey, we have this other organization that's just come in, just absorb it. They physically can't unless you have a strategy to do so. And if you ask the leader to come up with that strategy and run the business as usual, that's a pitfall. That's 2 for 1, 2 jobs in one person. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And there's so many cases of this kind of thing. How do you get over that pitfall? You can do a couple of things. Consulting is always easy, but if you're not, some organizations are not comfortable with consulting right off the bat. They can attend various M&A seminars, conferences, and you'll hear this pattern of how people got into this thing. The larger the organization, the bigger the problem is around that. But that is the number one pitfall, is underestimating the workload. How do you get over it? You just have a partner that will take on all of this work through a steering committee. You can run a governance through the steering committee to make all these decisions. And while this is going on, there's interim services as part of the IMO. You can transition this to business as usual at a pace the larger combined organization can tolerate, maintaining and protecting cash flow. The second pitfall that I won't keep it to 2. The second pitfall that's out there that's common is underestimating the change management. A company has a culture, a company has a way of doing things. The company you're acquiring makes sense from a go-to-market, from product lines, from services, cash flow. I mean, these kind of things, it makes sense. Culture is not something that's generic. So the other, and if the cultures clash, it's either the equation never works that good and they separate, that's worst case scenario, or you spend a lot more time absorbing the company or bringing them together as an integrated company.
Yep.
We talk about a 100-day plan. This is when it's aggressive and we want everything perfect. A 100-day plan can turn into much longer than that, several, maybe a year, maybe longer. If the culture doesn't work, if there's constant friction. So the organizational change management, including the culture, is the second most common pitfall that makes integration that much more difficult.
Okay, interesting. So I know we're kind of running into time here a little bit. Anything else that you think is I should be asking you that maybe you haven't been asked, or anything
Well,
that
I
you
can
want
tell you.
to
So
discuss?
I'm with right now. I'm in one of my clients is involved in a heavy acquisition phase, so a lot of roll-ups. If when you're doing an acquisition successfully and so on, this enables the organization to go after more companies to acquire. The flip side of that is, as you're acquiring companies, to make a deal, the stars align, the negotiations, that's when it happens. You got to execute. If you're constantly working on integration of the companies you've purchased and never finishing them, you're now capped at what you can do. So you may have fantastic funding, you just can't be able to execute on it. So that's the importance of getting these acquisition 100-day plans, all of this kind of stuff done quickly, because the other aspect of it is giving you the freedom to go after more targets. So it's a function of how quickly do you want to grow, what are your expectations. If you have a long runway, which typically nobody has, then you can do things very cumbersome and slowly. But if you want to be very precise and be right on with your funding, you have to do this thing quickly. And all the things we discussed earlier, I would say that's a message to everybody that's listening.
Yeah. So post integration is really part of your should be part of your M&A strategy.
Absolutely, and early on.
Early on, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, listen, I think on that note, I think it's a good point to wrap up. It's after 2:30. Really appreciate you joining me today. I think this is a great conversation, and I hope to see more conversations around this, because as I mentioned earlier, I really don't hear about this enough. So I'm sure the audience got a lot out of it.
Exactly.
How can people contact you? Are you on the BizNexus platform or email? What's the best?
The best is lperuthical@lcgadvisors.com, or just go to our webpage. I'm on there, lcgadvisors.com, and I believe on BizNexus as well, but I'm not sure about that, Roman. But yeah, I just want to also let you know, I really appreciate this. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for having me.
Of course, and we'll have you on again. Awesome. Well, if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm on BizNexus, Roman at DueDilio.com as well. And we're going to be hosting more of these. So we'll see you at the next one.
All right.
Thank you. Awesome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.